All right, so I'm ready to quote unquote get in trouble because I know how these things go. But just to fair warn you, if you need a warning, I guess a trigger warning, we're going to talk about a topic that is football related, yet also racially charged and political. And yeah, I don't apologize for that, but that's a warning if you care because politics is everywhere. Get over it. All right, so we're going to talk about the Rooney Rule, the new proposals that are probably going to get shut down because they've been getting a lot of heat, but these are some proposals. So background real quick, if you don't know the Rooney Rules in the NFL, this was basically a rule instituted so that it's basically an initiative to increase the hiring of minority coaches. And so essentially the Rooney Rule just says that in each time you're hiring a head coach, I don't know if it's an executive, it might be as well, that you have to interview somebody or invite somebody interviewed that's a minority. So without dancing around, it rides very close to affirmative action, which is another hotbed topic. So now what they're proposing is that what they're basically saying it hasn't worked, at least not to the effect that they want. And so what they're proposing now is to change draft picks. Basically, if you have head coach or a executive that's a minority or minority descent, then and they stay past the year, you'll move up so many, your third round pick will move up so many picks. And that if they stay past, whatever amount of time, then your third round pick moves up even more picks. And so I believe what they're proposing now is that you could go from the middle of the third round into the second round just for having a minority coach or executive. And so that's essentially the idea, is that your draft picks increase in value if you have a minority. So how do we wade into this? Let me say this, that there's some separate things here. Let me say that off the bat because I know how people are and they're ready to just push these issues together. They're not together. I think that they're both happening at the same time, but I don't think that they're all the same thing. So number one, we start with this idea of our PC culture, and everybody's upset about something. Everybody is in a race to be oppressed and try to leverage that and blah, 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 blah. So we're going to cry foul for the sins of the past, which definitely in some cases are very much warranted and necessary. And so one of those things is that, hey, you got a league full of African-American players. How come coaches aren't African-American? How come the GMs aren't African-American? And some would even say, how come the owners aren't African-American? And yeah, that's a whole nother level. I won't even touch that one. And so I think there is definitely at times a case to talk about representation. Does every time that people complain about, is that, valid? No, I 100% don't believe that. But there definitely are times and places. And so there's something you could look at. Now, I don't know that, well, I actually do know. You don't have solid figures on coaches in the US as far as how many coaches are out there on each level and what are, the statistics of each one of them. You probably could get pretty close with the NFL and the college system, but in the high school system, in the GA system, new coaches are coming up every year. It'd probably be hard to do. But anyway, because you got to look at the pool first. And that's one thing that I will say, not about this in general, or not about this specifically, but in general, whenever we have these conversations, people ignore the pool. For me, because this is a bigger issue than just coaching. But for me in education, I hear it all the time with teachers in general, males, all males, but then males of color. And so there's always this cry about there's no males of color and whatnot. And I'll give education a credit because they haven't been as silly as some people. They've recognized, look, we can say that, but there's not a lot of males in general, let alone males of color, enrolling into teaching programs or education programs. Like you could do a quick sweep across the majors of different major colleges. There's not a lot to begin with. So to expect a lot of teachers to be representative of that doesn't make sense. So I don't know the coaching pool as far as that. But I would venture to guess that is more so on the European American side. Now that does come from a historical context, which is the other part of this that is together but still kind of separate because it's bigger than coaching, as I said. And this is one that people argue with a lot, but I feel how I feel about it. And that's this idea of people hooking each other up. Now, it does not matter to me because this whole thing to me is silly. It doesn't matter to me what your background is. If you're getting hooked up, you're getting hooked up. You know what I'm saying? If a coach hooks me up and he's European American, I'm African American, and he hooks me up, is it all of a sudden okay now we understand it because I'm a minority? I don't think so. I mean, I don't know. I personally don't see a problem with it because I've been through the ranks. I don't see a problem with people hooking each other up to a certain extent. But for the most part, I don't see a problem with it. And so it doesn't matter to me the instance in which it happens, which way it happens. People hook each other up. I mean, that happens in society in a lot of different ways. But football is definitely one of those climb your way up the ladder type places. And so you start off wherever you start off. But everything about coaching is connections. And I mean everything. Even if you're a really good coach at a young age or whatever, you have to make the connections with other coaches because then that's when opportunities open up and then they hit you up. Everybody talks about how important it is to hire a coach early so they can get their coaches on the staff. Guess what? Their coaches are people that they worked with. People that they know or have been recommended to them by people they trust. And I don't see nothing wrong with that because I've been in position, not in the NFL, of course, but I've been in positions to put together a staff or work with a staff. And I want my people. I've been in situations where I got a staff assigned to me and it was horrible. You want people that know you, that you know their work ethic, you know how they're going to function and everything else. Now, with that being said, does that always work out for you? No, of course. Like there's a lot of people that tell you don't hire family when you're doing business. You know them and they know you and all that, but doesn't mean it's going to work out. So it's not 100% proof, but it's a natural thing to want to hire the people you know. I mean, even like, let's not act like there was some, concerted black effort to get the coaches of minority or African American descent to where they are now. No, they got hooked up and they had friends who were from different backgrounds, whether it was the same or theirs or different. And so that's how coaching works. And again, I don't say that you have to do it that way. It's obviously with a big staff, it's a mix of different things. But I understand why people do it. I've seen it work out on different ways. So anyway, I'm a person that has been through that. I would say I've been through those hoops and obstacles and decided not to continue on for different reasons. But I've seen what it looks like and I know what it looks like. And it really is. I mean, you just hope that your work stands out and that you impress somebody, and really you're just waiting for them to make it big. Like if you see a lot of coaches, they'll come from smaller pro because you got to work your way up. It's a hierarchy. But you'll see that they started somewhere, or that the main coach started somewhere smaller, and then they went to a bigger job, and then that's how that coach also went to a bigger job. A lot of coaches follow each other. And so if you're a really young coach and that head coach is the only guy you know at whatever small D2, D3 school, and he gets a job at a D1, then that's how you can make it. Now, if you're a little bit of an older coach and that head coach gets a D1 job, but you also know another coach who just got a new job, like, you got options now. That's just how it works. And so I understand that. And that's where it really starts. That's where all this starts. Before we even get to the Rooney Rule and talking about how to force people to do things, and talking about if there's a lot of qualified coaches that aren't getting jobs and all these different things. Before we even talk about it, it starts back there. You going up the ladder. And that, again, that's not just in football. That's not just in sports. That's in a lot of different things. And so you choosing who you surround yourself with is very important. Now, get into, I guess the other part of it is people make decisions. As far as head coaches, really, that's what we're talking about. As far as head coach, I think in general, there's a lot of coaches on every level that don't deserve that, or when I say don't deserve, but aren't as qualified. Position coaches, coordinators, every level of football. But when we're talking about the NFL, like, there's plenty of jobs, and not to say that people aren't missing out on jobs, but there's plenty of coaches that have had long careers and done things. Everybody's focused on the head coaching job. Now, I will say this before going forward. Head coaching job might be the highest in the whatever, but that it's not Madden. I keep saying that. It's not a video game. You don't just, I'm offensive coordinator. Okay, I'm good at this. Now I can be a head coach. I said that about Nagy to the Bears. I said about other people. It ain't got nothing to do with race. That's just not how coaching works. Just because you were good at one thing doesn't mean that you're suited to be a head coach. Just because you're really good at coaching a position doesn't mean you're suited to be a coordinator. Just because you're really good at game planning doesn't mean you're good at play calling. So it's not, I get that it's the highest profile and all that, but let's just put that out there. Not every coach is meant for that. And so there are plenty of coaches that have made a long living in the NFL at various positions, and they're okay with it, or at least that's what they're good at. And so I get the idea of, like, let's just give people a shot. Look, if it was fair, of course, nobody that wasn't really prepared for it would get the shot. I agree. But I'm just throwing that out there. Let's not get into this. They did it, so we're going to do it. So I don't care if that person's not suited to be a head coach. Let's just throw them out there. I'm not advocating for that. All right. So the Rooney Rule, and effectively, we're talking about affirmative action. Do I think that's the way to go? I honestly don't. I never think that's the way to go. I think that the idea that they said, now, of course, people are going to say that people are just doing that to cover their backside. Possibly. But the idea behind it, or at least the way it's pitched, is that if you talk to a more diverse pool of candidates, then naturally the hiring is going to change. That hasn't been the case. But also on top of that, I think, why would you think it would be the case? Because it's being forced. Whenever you're talking about whenever you make somebody do it, I don't know that the results are going to be the same. Because even if you talk to somebody and you're like, wow, we probably never would talk to that candidate, that was great, there's still, and I think more than racism, which we have seen, more than racism, freedom, as far as American people, means something. People don't like being told what to do. And so I think that bias is going to be in the back of your head more than anything. And so I never thought that was a good idea, or in general, to force people to have things, because either you end up in resilience or you end up in quotas. None of them are good. And so that's how I felt about it from the beginning. Now you're talking about a rule where you're changing the competitive balance of the league. I don't care what it is. I don't like it. I honestly, even if I was okay with the first Rooney rule, this goes way beyond that. This goes way beyond that, in my opinion. Changing draft picks just be like, look, I'm not going to get too deep into it. Some people will call it reverse racism. It's an interesting dynamic you put yourself in when you say just because the color of the coach's skin will give you better draft, picks. That's tough. That's all I'll say, is that it's tough for the NFL to swing that. It's tough for anybody to swing that, no matter how you flip it, to be honest with you. And we could talk about historical precedent. We talk about a bunch of things. It's tough for you to swing that. And so, again, it's one thing to try to open up options in the search process. It's a whole nother thing to change the competitive advantage of the league. And so, I mean, even on its best day, 32 teams have minority head coaches, and then what? You just ruin the draft, and the draft is completely messed up. Or that, we all got these coaches, like, we couldn't turn down that Rooney rule. Now, nobody's going to say that. But if that's the feeling and perception, then what? Then what did you accomplish? You're going to sit here and say, okay, well, looks like, or people will say, looks like the NFL is just profiting off of minorities again. Like, they don't actually care. They just want to get the prize. Like, that's all people are going to say. You setting yourself up for failure. Like, yes, people are going to keep complaining. Oh, we want representation in the league. Like, you got all these black players. All the coaches should be black. Two different positions. But yeah, you're going to get that. But then what's the upside of you doing this and it working? I just don't know that there's an upside. Not to mention, I just don't see anybody being okay with it. So there's that. I think, again, we're talking about a bigger conversation with kind of, we need another word, not nepotism, but another word involving race. But then a very specific conversation about the new Rooney rules, I just think is very problematic. I just don't see how anybody can make that seem okay. And usually the answer is the same. And that answer is never explored because it takes too long. The correct answer takes a long time. It takes a lot of work. People don't want that. It's not like the NFL don't want it, and neither do the people crying for justice. They don't want it either. You may be used to, but not anymore in the 2020 internet age. Like, people want something right now. They don't, like, I've heard it. So many people, so many quote unquote social justice people, they want it right now. That takes too long. The real answer, just like it is with getting more representation in education, just like it is with getting more representation in STEM fields, just like it is in anywhere else, is you gotta go back towards the root. You change the pool and then you start to change things. Like, there are a lot of coaches, a whole lot of coaches now I don't think it's the same as education. There's a lot of coaches, but is it really in our DNA to be coaches? I wouldn't say our DNA, because that I was using that figuratively. Is it in the culture to become coaches? Not really, not the same way. And again, that's a historical factor. So then the same thing that you say with anything else, you got to start introducing it at a younger age. Like, yes, we want to introduce younger kids to sports and everything, and that's great, but we also should talk about the benefits of coaching, the thoughts of coaching. And because really, and I mean, you can see it in the NFL right now. It's very much oh man, that's coaches do that, I play. And there's few players that's the biggest pool you can even talk about. You talk about how many players in the league are African American. That's the biggest pool you could talk about becoming potential coaches. But see how very few players, African American or not, are interested in that. Very few are interested going beyond what their assignments are or anything else. It's not a lot of football loving, football savvy people, especially now. Because now that you get to hear from players more, almost every player says the same thing. I don't want to be no coach. I don't want to be no coach. You see how much they work. You see how long hours they work. I don't want to do that. I don't want to do that. And so that you start there, not starting with the players because they're older, it's too late, but starting with younger players to start pushing the idea of coaching to be more noble than what it is. I mean, it's no different than thinking about the quarterback position. It used to be the running back position a while ago. That was the thing. And it wasn't like one person came to the league and everybody was like, okay, I want to be a quarterback. No, it was a build over time as people saw what the quarterback position was and blah, blah, blah. Then people start gravitating to quarterback position more than running back position. It takes time. You got to start at the roots. You can't just flip the rules and force people to do anything. That's not going to change anything. And then I hear people like, oh, you can't change their hearts. You got to force them into it. But what good does that do? Now that you've been forced to have a person you don't want, whether rightly or wrongly, you don't want them. Now you're forced to have them. How is that a good situation for anybody? And so I think, again, you got to just start like they do NFL Play 60. They do a lot with trying to grow the game of football so that it stays strong. Do the same with, coaching is part of the game. You got to start doing that. I mean, in the NFL is way better off than the NBA. Like, you don't even talk about the NBA. Like, those coaches come from out of nowhere and don't be knowing nothing, don't do nothing, and be getting fired. So I think the pool is a lot stronger, but you can continue to enrich it. And even, I don't know how much you can do with owners, which is really the big key, but maybe the executives, the big decision makers, start getting them into more places, start getting them around more people, start letting them. And I have to believe, again, people are going to argue with me on this, but I have to believe that if you're at the top, it's not like you don't know black coaches exist or whatever. I think you know that. You talk to players. A lot of times GMs and execs and scouts are part of the draft process. You meet their high school coaches, you meet their college coaches. So you know that it's a big thing. But the difference becomes when you have recommendations. When you start asking recommendations in other people's favors, that's when you start kind of boxing yourself into groupthink, because people are going to recommend their people. And that's just what it is. Like, people complain about all these other people that got jobs and whose resume was this and who's that. The resume is fine. Just like in the NFL or the draft, I keep saying, like, it ain't just 40 time. It ain't just stats in college. It ain't just what mock drafts say. You have to feel comfortable with making that choice. And so you're going to lean to people you trust. And I was going to say the bridge. I don't know if that's the right word, but we'll just use that. The bridge right now for European American coaches is just stronger right now. And yes, you get people at the top and that starts helping, or people that are accomplished like a Mike Tomlin, whatever, and they put other people on. Like, all that stuff helps and it matters. But to me, in my personal opinion, I think you start lower than the NFL. Instead of attacking the NFL, I think yes, you always do your due diligence as much as you can, but it's 32 different teams. They independent as much as you can. But I think if you start on the lower tier, promoting coaches, highlighting coaches, I think that just increases the pool and makes it better, in my opinion. But the Rooney Rule stuff, like, no, I think that would just have a negative effect, to be honest with you. So there's no perfect answer, but I believe I know the answer isn't doing what they're proposing to do. So anyway, go to the comment section. Let me know what you think. Once again, if you want to leave a message, comment, you click the link in the description section. If it's good, I'll put it on the show. Thumbs up, subscribe, and thank you for listening.